In the village of Drakova, nestled deep in the Carpathian folds, where fog sits thick like an old widow's shawl, there was a silence that did not mourn with tears. Grief here had teeth. They called it the mourning rite, and it was old. Older than the chapel, older than the language carved into the headstones, older even than the bell that tolled without rope on nights of passing. When someone in the village died, the family did not wail or wear black. They did not light candles or speak to the dead. They chose a tooth, one from the living, a single molar or incisor, ripped not from the dead, but from the grieving bloodline. The ritual demanded the tooth of sorrow, not silence. And with that bloodied gift, they would walk to the threshold of their home and bury it. There, under the door, beneath first place one enters and exits, the mouth of the house, they would press the offering into the soil. For it was believed that only then could the dead find rest. Otherwise, their spirit would claw back to the familiar, unable to enter or leave, forever gnashing, forever seeking the tooth that was never given. No one questioned it, not openly, not until Annika. She lived in the smallest house in the village, made of soft, rotting pine and thatch that hissed in the wind like it remembered the storms. Annika was not cruel, she was not rebellious, but she was a mother. And when her daughter Mila died, 5 years old, with hair like sun-soaked wheat and hands always curled into dandelions, Annika could not bring herself to obey. She refused to pull a tooth, not from her mouth, not from her husband's, not from anyone. "It's barbaric," she whispered to her husband the night of the funeral. "She's gone. No pain will bring her peace." That night, the air didn't weep, but the floor did. It began as a soft scratching, like a beetle dragging itself through dust, then a tap, then two, then something more, a grind, a chatter, the sound of enamel on enamel, as if someone were chewing just below the boards, laughing without joy. Annika told herself it was her nerves. Grief was a strange thing. It made shapes in wallpaper, voices in drains. But when she stepped into the kitchen and felt a shiver rise through the soles of her feet, she knew something had awakened. By the third night, the sounds had grown bold. The living room whispered, the hallway sighed, and beneath the nursery, where Mila once slept with her tiny jaw slack in dreams, the gnashing never stopped. It rose with the moon and paused at dawn, like some ghost clock ticking with teeth instead of time. Then came the mirrors. Every pane in the house, from polished steel to broken shards in drawers, began to betray her. She would glance sideways and catch grins, smiles far too wide, all teeth, no lips. And always the reflection wasn't hers, it was smaller, too small. The smile of a child with a missing front tooth. She begged her husband, Davor, to speak to the elder, to do something. But Davor, who had seen 3 siblings buried before he turned 10, said only, "She waits. She cannot cross. You must give." "No," she whispered to Davor. "It's been enough pain." Davor did not argue again, but he began to bleed from the gums. He grew pale, his speech slurred, and one morning she found a tooth on his pillow, whole, clean, as if gently laid there by a hand that wanted her to notice. That evening, Davor was gone. No note, no trail, just an open door, and the floor in the nursery, newly warped, as if something had swelled beneath it. Annika did not bury his tooth. She kept it in a box. She held on to it like it might whisper his name back to her. And that's when the house changed. It breathed, At night, it exhaled mildew and sucked the warmth from blankets. The walls swelled and contracted like lungs, and the floorboards no longer creaked, they chewed. She once tried to nail a crucifix into the wall. The wood spat it out. The villagers noticed, but they said nothing, for in Drakova, curses were not spoken aloud. They lived in doorframes and soup spoons, in lullabies and wind. To name a haunting was to invite it deeper. Still, the children began walking faster past her gate. The postman left letters by the road. The priest, when asked to bless the home, offered a silent look and a trembling hand. Inside, Annika kept the box of teeth hidden in the pantry. Hers, Davor's, Mila's, found somehow beneath the bed days after her burial. 3 teeth, 3 names. The sounds grew louder. One night, in the hush before midnight, Annika heard a giggle. Not the dream giggle of a child. No, this one was wrong, hollow. It had rhythm, but no warmth. And when she rose from bed, following it, the house guided her. The floorboards tilted just slightly, like a breath catching in the throat. The hallway stretched, the shadows leaned forward, and the nursery door opened on its own. Inside, her daughter's crib stood untouched, but on the floor, perfectly centered beneath the window, lay a 4th tooth. No blood, no root, but freshly pulled. Annika did not scream. Grief had already stolen her voice, but her knees buckled, and she wept for the first time since the funeral. In the morning, the tooth was gone, but a new smile greeted her in the hallway mirror. This one, wider, hungrier, familiar. From then on, the house whispered constantly. It muttered in corners. It hummed lullabies backwards. It remembered all the teeth never offered and spoke their names in the creak of stairs and the sighs of doors. The villagers spoke in hushed tones. They called her house the Mouth House. Some claimed they saw shadows inside, pacing like wolves in suits of skin. Others said the front door grinned at night, but no one dared enter. And Annika, she never left. They say her mouth was empty when she died. Not a single tooth remained, and still none were found beneath the threshold. The mourning rite was not written down. It lived in bone and breath, passed through lullabies and superstitions, taught not in classrooms, but by the cold hush that settled after a death. It did not need parchment. It had the soil, the doors, the teeth. Long before the village was called Drakova, before the language shifted and the borders were drawn and redrawn like bleeding wounds, the people here were mountain folk. They lived among caves with mouths darker than night and trees that bent toward whispers. And they believed the soul could only leave the earth if the living gave part of themselves back to it. Not just tears, not just prayers, but a tooth. It was the price of peace. To die was to shut one's mouth forever. But if no mourner opened theirs, if no blood sacrifice marked the parting, then the dead would gnaw at the veil between worlds until their hunger tore through. So the rite was born. When someone passed, the body was laid in the home for 3 nights, candles placed in each corner of the room, but no one cried. Crying invited the spirit to linger. Only one act mattered. A living member of the bloodline would choose a tooth, usually a back molar, though in old times the tongue was consulted, and it would be pulled without anesthesia, without delay. Then, just before dawn, the family would bury it under the doorstep. The ground was marked not with stones or crosses, but with silence. That silence was sacred. It told the dead, "You are remembered. Your pain is carried. Go now." Those who obeyed said the air grew lighter, the house would stop moaning, dreams would grow clear again. But those who didn't, their homes became mouths that chewed backward, and for centuries no one dared to defy it. Until Anika. The elder of the village, known only as Tataluka, had seen the curse twice before. He walked with a cane carved from yew, teeth etched into the handle, real teeth, it was said. He lived on the hill above the village, in a hut where bees swarmed the windows even in winter. People came to him in secret, with dreams too strange for priests and bruises too circular for doctors. And when Anika's husband vanished, Luka knew. He lit the hearth before dawn and turned the lock, though he expected no visitors. He poured boiled wine and set 2 cups, one for himself, one for the morning. But Anika never came. Instead, Luka went to her house. He did not knock. He pressed his hand to the door frame, closed his eyes, and listened. The wood was grinding, not rotting, not creaking, grinding, like teeth. He left a note under a rock on her porch. "You did not bury your sorrow. Now it buries you." He waited. No answer. So Luka opened his old records, scraps of parchment kept by his grandmother, passed from hand to hand across generations, like secrets in a child's game. And on them were stories, names, warnings, and 2 were marked in red. The Kresnik family, 1792. When their patriarch died, the youngest son fled the village rather than surrender a tooth. Weeks later, livestock were found with shattered jaws. Children began grinding their teeth to dust in their sleep. The son returned, missing every tooth in his head, hollow-eyed, smiling without lips. The house was burned, but the earth kept chewing. The Velka widow, 1836. She had no children to mourn her husband. No one pulled a tooth. Her home became known as the Gnashing Gate. All who entered reported hearing laughter in the floor, being bitten by air. Eventually, the house sank. Yes, sank into the mud, leaving behind only a single black tooth where the door once stood. Anika's house now bore the same hum. Luka knew it was too late for prayers. One night, the villagers gathered, quietly as always, with faces wrapped in scarves and eyes wide in the moonlight. "She has not come to confession," whispered one. "The air around her chimney smells like boiled teeth," said another. And still, no one acted, because tradition was not enforced with threats, it was enforced with fear. Then, one morning, the baker's boy ran down the path screaming. He had kicked a ball too hard, and it had rolled under Anika's fence. When he crawled to retrieve it, he saw it, a small hole beneath her doorstep, freshly dug, wet earth, and just inside, the glint of something white. Not a tooth, a smile. A full row of tiny teeth grinning up from the soil like a child buried face first, still trying to speak. Elsewhere, in the chapel's records, Father Oleg, still young, still unsure, wrote in his journal, "They say she is cursed, but I wonder, what if she is right? What if the pain is not required? What if we've fed the earth so long we've forgotten why? Perhaps the teeth don't trap spirits. Perhaps they feed them." He never visited Anika, but he kept writing. "Tonight I heard tapping beneath the altar. I thought it mice, but when I checked the floor, there was a loose board. Under it, a single tooth. Human, no root, just waiting. I replaced it. I did not sleep."
Annika, meanwhile, had stopped eating, not out of sorrow, out of defense. She said the food bit back. The spoon burned her lips, bread bled, milk turned warm and sticky like saliva. And every time she tried to chew, she swore something inside her mouth laughed. She wrote letters, dozens, to no one, to Mila, to herself, to whatever lived in the walls. One read, "You want a piece of me? Take it, but not for tradition, not for silence, only for the truth. My pain is not currency." She never sent them. She burned them in the stove, but the smoke that rose from the chimney smelled of enamel. At last, during a frost so deep it cracked the window glass in the chapel, the elder returned to the house with a spade. He did not knock. He walked to the threshold, knelt in the ice, and began to dig. The ground resisted. It clung like gums, but Luca kept going until he found them. Not one tooth, dozens, layered, stacked, all sizes, all ages, some carved with names, others with symbols long forgotten. One had a hole drilled through the center, as if it had been worn on a string. He placed them in a sack, tied it shut, and stood. As he turned to leave, he heard it. From inside the house, a laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just knowing, like something that had been waiting, patiently, grinning. And as he stepped off the porch, the door behind him opened just a crack, not by hand, not by wind, but by invitation. Inside, darkness smiled, and someone whispered a word Luca had not heard since childhood. More.
They said the house was small. They were wrong. The outside gave that illusion. 4 crooked walls, a slanted roof smothered in moss, and a chimney that coughed more than it breathed. But to step inside Annika's home was to descend, not downward in distance, but inward, like entering something alive, something waiting. The air was different, thick, wet, too warm for winter, too cold for breath. It didn't circulate, it swam. Each inhale felt like swallowing a secret someone had tried to forget. And the smell, it wasn't rot, not exactly. It was something older, womb-like, milky, the scent of damp cloth steeped in sorrow and sweat. And underneath it all, a copper note, barely there, but sharp enough to sting, like the taste of a bitten tongue held too long in grief. The house had no proper hallways, only transitions, rooms bleeding into each other without warning, like thoughts unraveling mid-prayer. Walls bulged in places they shouldn't, as if they'd inhaled too much grief and never exhaled. There were no straight lines, no true corners. Everything was softened, swollen, like inside flesh. Annika once said it reminded her of being pregnant, the heaviness, the disorientation, the sense that you were not alone in your own body. Now, the house had that feeling, except whatever lived inside it wasn't growing. It was remembering. The nursery was worst. Once painted pale blue, the color had long since bled into a sickly gray. Stuffed animals sat in silence, their button eyes peeled toward the crib which remained untouched since Mila's death, not out of sentiment, but fear. Annika had tried, once, to move the crib, to rearrange, to cleanse, but the floor pushed back. Literally. The legs of the crib refused to budge. When she pulled, the wood creaked,
not with pressure, but with laughter, as if the house found her effort amusing. She left it alone after that. On some nights, when the wind outside went quiet and the air inside the house turned sticky, the mobile above the crib would spin, not violently, slowly, tenderly, as though unseen hands were singing a lullaby to bones. Annika stopped entering that room. She locked the door. The next morning, it stood open. Elsewhere, the house shifted. The kitchen grew smaller, not in measurements, but in presence. The ceiling lowered, or the floor rose, it was impossible to tell. Cabinets warped, drawers refused to open, and the sink, once silent, began to drip, not water, but thick brown stains that took the shape of teeth if left too long. One night, as Annika stood staring into the pot she hadn't used in months, she heard something behind her. A murmur. Not a voice, just sound, like a mouth moving without breath. She turned. No one. But a chair had moved. Just an inch. Just enough. She left it. The next day, there were bite marks in the wood. The walls began to bleed, not with blood, but with moisture from inside, damp trails that snaked down the wallpaper like fingers dragged through womb water. And in the center of the stain, always, there emerged the shape of a smile. Faint, fading, but undeniable. Annika began to cover the stains, with blankets, with holy pictures, with silence. But the walls kept remembering. She tried to leave, truly. One morning, with a suitcase of clothes and a photo of Mila pressed to her chest, Annika opened the front door and found nothing. Not the village, not the frost-covered fields, just fog. Endless, wet fog that pulsed and shifted as if breathing. She stepped forward, 2 steps, and the door slammed shut behind her. She turned, and there it was again, the house, but closer. It had moved. Now its windows blinked, its roof groaned, and the door creaked open again, not in welcome, but in hunger. She walked back inside, not because she wanted to, because she realized it wasn't a house anymore. It was a body, and she was still inside it. At night, the dreams returned. Mila's face, Mila's laughter, but not the way Annika remembered. No. Mila stood at the foot of her bed with a grin far too wide, teeth too many for a child. Her eyes were hollow. Her voice was hoarse but eager. "You forgot my tooth, Mama." Annika would wake, drenched in sweat, her mouth aching. She checked every morning, counting her teeth in the mirror like rosary beads. One morning, one was gone. She hadn't pulled it, but it was gone. And on the floor beside her bed, a small wet patch, like someone had drooled in grief. The house fed on memory. It sucked it from the furniture, from the air, from Annika herself. She forgot names, forgot prayers, forgot why Mila had died. Was it sickness? An accident? The house wouldn't let her remember. It needed her forgetful. It needed her hollow. Only then could it fill her with whispers, with songs sung backwards, with rituals she had never learned but now knew in her bones. One night, She sat in the center of the living room, lit only by the amber flicker of a dying oil lamp. The shadows around her stretched like limbs. She held the box of teeth, Davor's, Mila's, her own. Her fingers shook, but her mouth was still. Still until a whisper rose from the floorboards. "One more." She looked down. The boards beneath her flexed like skin. The box opened on its own, and the teeth inside began to rattle. She tried to scream, but something pressed against her throat from the inside, like a tongue not her own. And from beneath the floor came chewing, slow, purposeful, patient, as if something was feeding on what she refused to bury. And in the nursery, the crib swayed gently back and forth. The mobile spun, and the air pulsed, not like breath, like a heartbeat, inside a womb. But it wasn't nurturing. It was remembering and waiting.
The floorboards had once been pine, simple, golden planks that creaked with age, but held firm through snow and sorrow alike. They were the bones of the house, honest, steady. But now, they smiled. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't grief's trick on Annika's mind. They truly smiled. She saw it first in the nursery. The morning after the box of teeth rattled in her lap, Annika ventured, against every scream in her blood, into Mila's room. The air had changed, heavier, sweet with something like milk curdled in shadow. The crib was still, the mobile unmoving, but the floor was warped. A line of boards had lifted ever so slightly, curving up at the edges, bending inward at the center. It looked like a mouth, a wide, warped grin, spanning the room from corner to corner, teeth hidden beneath its slats, laughter pulsing through the grain. She backed out without breathing, but the smile followed. By dusk, the same curve appeared beneath the kitchen table, then in the hallway, then under her bed. Not all at once, not aggressive, just patient, creeping. Each day, a new grin in the wood. And beneath those smiles came the sound. Gnashing, the muffled crunch of teeth grinding against one another. It started low, just on the edge of hearing, like remembering the sound of chewing. But as days passed, it grew, wet, slow, deliberate, and never alone. Sometimes it sounded like 2 sets of jaws, sometimes 10. Sometimes, on long sleepless nights, when she lay awake clutching the last candle, the sound changed. It giggled, not the light joy of a child, but a cracked tittering, like laughter squeezed through broken teeth. And it always came from under the floor, from beneath the smiling planks. She tried to sleep on the table. It was the only surface not made of floor, but the laughter still reached her. It echoed up the legs, vibrated through the wood, hummed against her spine. The night she broke, she tried to rip the boards out. She dragged in the old hatchet from the woodshed and slammed it down on the nursery floor. Once, twice, 3 times. The blade bounced. Not a scratch. The wood bent slightly under each blow, like flesh bruising, not shattering. On the 4th strike, the hatchet stuck. Annika pulled. Nothing. She yanked with both hands. The floor pulled back. The hatchet vanished.
swallowed like a tongue retreating behind lips. And from beneath the planks came a murmur. That hurt. The next morning, she awoke to find footprints in dust. Small, bare, damp. They led from the nursery, through the hallway, into the kitchen, and stopped at the pantry. She opened the door. The box of teeth was gone. In its place, a single item sat on the shelf, a cracked porcelain plate decorated with hand-painted violets, her wedding china, one she hadn't seen since Davor disappeared, and on it, a single molar, still fresh, still red at the root. Not hers, not Mila's, his.
She didn't speak. There was no one to hear her anyway. But that night, she sat in the kitchen, candle flickering, staring at the tooth on the plate. It grinned, somehow. She didn't touch it. Instead, she whispered, first time in weeks, "Davor?" The floor answered, a low, slow creak, followed by a breath, a sound too human, too close. Then came the footfalls, not across the floor, under it, as though someone was walking just beneath the planks, carefully, gently, as if not to wake her. They passed beneath her chair, paused, and then a voice, his. "You never opened the door." She froze. "You locked me out. I knocked. I begged. You let the wind in, but not me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You knew," the voice replied. "You always knew. That's why you didn't bury the tooth." Silence stretched. The boards beneath her feet grew warm. Then, a small pressure, like fingers pressing upward from below. Not hard, just a reminder. And the smile in the floor widened. For the first time, Annika left the house at night. She wrapped herself in every coat she owned and stepped outside, barefoot. The snow didn't bite her. The cold didn't touch her. She walked to the chapel, to the elder's hut, to the cemetery, all closed, all dark, all silent. So she returned home. And as she stepped back over the threshold, the wood beneath her feet sighed, like lungs emptying, like the house had been holding its breath, waiting for her return. It was no longer just a home. It was a mouth, and she was the tongue. That night, she lay on the floor, not on a bed, not on blankets, just the floorboards, smooth and grinning. She whispered, "What do you want?" The boards pulsed beneath her. The smile beneath her back curved further, and the voice, no longer Davor's, no longer human, answered, "You, at last." Then the floor opened. Not wide, not enough to swallow, just enough to taste. She felt it in her skin, 1,000 tiny pricks, as though unseen gums were testing her shape. And in the dark, something giggled and gnawed. Not all teeth are equal. Some carry only the echo of bites taken in hunger. Others hold more. Pain, grief, names. That was what Annika learned when she found the second box. It was not hers, not the small wooden one she kept hidden in the pantry where Davor's tooth had once lain beside Mila's tiny incisor. That box was long gone, eaten perhaps, or swallowed by the house like so many other things. No, this one was older. Stone,
carved from what looked like bone, but heavy, chalky, and warm. She found it behind a loose plank in the nursery after a night of relentless gnashing beneath her bed. Something had been tapping, not wildly, rhythmically, like a finger knocking in code. She followed the sound to the wall. Her hands moved without her. The plank slid free. Inside the hollow, the box. Heavy, sealed with wax that bore the impression of teeth instead of a symbol. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, she found 27 teeth. Human. Some yellowed, some cracked. One had a gold cap. Another had 3 roots tangled like nerves. But all of them had been carved. Not just with scratches or sigils, but with names. Tiny, precise, etched in the enamel as if by needle or ritual blade. Some names she recognized faintly from whispers and gravestones. Others she knew too well. Davor, Mila, her own. But the most chilling was the one she didn't recognize, not from the village, not from any story, not even from memory. Elia. The name was burned into the molar at the bottom of the box. It had no roots, no stain. It looked unused, untouched, but new. And it hummed in her hand, like it knew it had never been buried, like it waited. She took the box to the mirror, not out of vanity, out of instinct. The same mirror that had once shown her Mila's too wide grin, the same one that flickered with reflections that weren't hers. Now the glass stared back, still until she held the tooth up. Then the surface rippled, like water disturbed by breath. And for a moment, just a flicker, she saw faces. Not reflections, not ghosts, memories. Worn into the teeth. Mothers crying without tears. Fathers placing teeth into the mouths of infants as offerings. Children biting the floorboards as they died one by one. Every name was a life. Every life was unfinished, and she was their mouth now. That night, the dreams returned, but they weren't hers. She was a boy running barefoot through fields that no longer existed. She was a midwife pulling a tooth out of her own mouth to place into the palm of a stillborn. She was a man named Elia, digging beneath his home, tooth in hand, tears dried from too many burials, and always something watching, not with eyes, with teeth. The dreams ended in silence. Then a voice. "You have our names, now give us rest." In the morning, she went to the hearth. The stones were blackened from winters long past, but one stone at the center glowed faintly. She pressed the box to it. The glow brightened, and the air shifted, like the house was listening. She opened the lid, whispered each name, carefully, with trembling lips. As she spoke, the floor groaned beneath her, not in pain, in relief, until she reached the last tooth, Elia. She paused. The moment she said the name aloud, something moved in the ceiling, fast, heavy, as if someone dropped from rafter to floor above. She rose, backed away, and then came the knock. Not at the door, under the floor. A slow, deliberate thud. Once, twice, then silence. She didn't answer, but the air pressed against her skin like fingers, like a hand against her chest, holding her still.
And in the silence, she heard it. A new voice, not a whisper, a murmur, deep, dry. "You carry our names, but not our bones."
She fell to her knees, cried out, "I didn't know!" The house didn't care. A crack appeared in the wall. Not a break, a smile. And beneath the floor, the chewing resumed, faster now, eager. That evening, she visited the elder again. This time she didn't knock. She burst into the hut, box clutched tight. Tataluka looked up from his corner, candlelight licking the hollows of his face. "I need to bury them," she said. He nodded. "But not here," he answered. "Not beneath the house." "Where then?" He reached behind him, pulled out a map, old, faded, marked with small black dots that bled into the paper. "This is where the names sleep," he said. He pointed to a spot near the edge of the forest, a pit, unmarked, untouched, a place they once called Usta bez jezika, the mouth without a tongue. "No prayers," Luka warned, "no fire, only silence. And if I do this, you give them rest. And me?" He looked at her long and soft. "You become silence." She went before dawn. The fog had teeth. The air tasted of metal. She carried the box in both hands like a cradle, like a coffin. At the edge of the forest, the trees leaned back, as if afraid to touch the place ahead. And there, beneath the twisted birch, she found it, the pit, shallow, still, breathing. The ground pulsed beneath her feet. She opened the box. One by one, she laid the teeth into the earth. She didn't speak, not even their names. She only wept. And with each tooth placed, the air grew lighter, until the final one, Ilya. As she set it down, the ground shuddered. A low moan rose from below, not pain, but something else. A thank you, a release. And then, silence. Real, whole. For the first time in weeks, the house stopped chewing. She returned home, opened the door, and the floor was flat, still. No smiles, no whispers. The teeth had been named, and now, perhaps, they could sleep. But that night, as she sat by the cold hearth, a final sound reached her ears. Soft, scratching, coming not from the floor, but from inside her mouth. She stood, went to the mirror, opened her lips. There, on her back molar, newly forming, faint and white, a name, not hers.
It began as an itch, a harmless sensation, fleeting, beneath the gums, first in Annika, then in others. By winter's end, 5 villagers complained of the same strange feeling, like their teeth were trying to speak, not ache, speak. The baker's son stopped eating crusts, said he could feel whispers behind his molars. The seamstress bit her tongue in her sleep and woke to blood and laughter. And old Petar, who'd never lost a single tooth in 70 years, woke one morning with an entire row gone, not broken, not stolen, simply vanished. He had no memory of it, only a dream of smiling. Not his smile, someone else's. They came to the elder. Tataluka lit incense soaked in marrow ash. He ran fingers along their jaws, murmured forgotten names. But the air was no longer obedient. Smoke curled in the wrong direction. Ashes settled on teeth, not skin. And the elder grew pale when he touched the seamstress's cheek and whispered, Your blood remembers what your mind refused." She didn't understand, but Annika did. Word of what she had done, of the box, the burial, the pit, spread like smoke through the village. Some feared her. Some watched her house for signs of collapse. But most envied her, because the chewing in her home had stopped, and theirs had just begun. The wood of their floors no longer creaked, it chattered. Windows blinked in moonlight, doors hissed with breath, and always, in the quiet between chores, they heard it, retching from the ground, as if the soil itself was trying to spit something out, something unburied. The elder called a gathering. It was the first in decades. They met not in the chapel, too sacred, but in the field of stones where no crops grew, only weeds and whispers. Luca stood at the center, cane gripped tight, voice cracking with memory. One woman refused the rite, and for her silence the house screamed. But in her defiance, a truth returned. We have buried our dead with pain, not love. We have carved names into teeth, not into hearts. And now the bones remember. Silence. Then old Petar, gums raw and trembling, asked, "What do we do?" The elder replied, "We listen." So they did, and what they heard was memory. In dreams, in mirrors, in the wet bend of spoons left too long in tea. Names once forgotten surfaced in the foam of boiling stew. Lullabies twisted backwards in the wind, and the trees along the edge of the forest began to lean toward the village, their roots gritting against stone like molars grinding in sleep. Something ancient was waking. Not a ghost, not a demon. Something worse, a memory unkept, a promise broken by generations who had obeyed the ritual but not the meaning, who had pulled teeth without mourning, who had buried pain like garbage, not sacrifice. And now the earth had grown hungry. One by one, the villagers brought their boxes. Each home had one, a tin, a pouch, a folded cloth with yellowing enamel tucked inside, relics of the mourning rite, but no one had ever dared open them after the burial, until now. They came to Annika's door. She did not answer, but she left it unlocked. They entered single file, each carrying a container of teeth. The house did not bite. It welcomed. And as they gathered around her hearth, laying the teeth in a circle, a sound rose from beneath the floor. Not gnashing, breathing, slow, steady, ancient, like a mouth preparing to speak after centuries of silence. Annika stood. She held no teeth, only the box of names burned into bone, and she said, "We buried what we were told, but never what we felt. These are not just teeth. They are what we refused to say, and now they say it for us." She opened the lid. A gust of wind swept through the room. Every candle died, and in that darkness, the teeth began to glow, faintly, from within, as if lit by the memory of being loved or feared or forgotten. No one moved, no one dared, until the elder stepped forward. He knelt, took a single tooth from his pouch, and whispered a name. Not of the dead, of a son he'd never held.
a boy born breathless in a winter storm. And as he spoke it, the air shifted, the floor creaked, then sighed, then stilled. It became a ritual, not one of pain, but confession. Each villager in turn returned to Annika's hearth. They brought their teeth, but not as offerings, as memories. They spoke the names behind the enamel, spoke the wounds, the regrets, the love they never voiced, the guilt they'd buried too deep for prayer. And the house listened, not as a monster, but as a womb, cracked, bleeding, but capable of holding, of birthing truth from silence. Then came the final visitor, a girl, no more than 12. She carried no box, only a single baby tooth, still white, still soft, and on it, written in ink so faint it barely existed, was the word, me. The girl said nothing, only placed it on the hearth, and as it touched the stone, a ripple passed through the room, through the floor, through the village. And in every home where a tooth had once been buried in fear or shame, the ground smiled, not to mock, to release. From that night on, the floorboards stopped gnashing. The fog retreated from the fields. The wind sang forward again. And in the mirror, Annika no longer saw her daughter's broken grin, only her own face, worn, hollow, but whole. She still had one tooth left to give. She would not pull it. She would name it and let it speak, not of pain, but of refusal, and how sometimes breaking a tradition is the only way to hear what it truly meant.
They told Luca he had inherited a house. He almost laughed. He barely remembered the village. His parents had died when he was 8, and after that he was swept into the gray corridors of institutions, foster homes, group shelters, temporary beds in buildings with numbers instead of names. His past was a torn envelope, unreadable, smelling faintly of mildew and burnt sugar. Until the litter arrived, typed, cold. To Luca I. Dragomir. Subject, Notice of Inheritance. The estate of Annika V. Dragomir, deceased, has passed to you as the next of kin. Property, House number 9, Drakova Village, Carpathian region. Condition, unoccupied, fully deeded, no legal disputes. He stared at it for an hour. The name Annika pulsed like a bruise behind his eyes. Some part of him stirred, not memory, bone. He arrived in Drakova on a fogless afternoon in early autumn. The village was small, shrinking even. Most homes had locked shutters. A single tavern offered beer on a hand-painted sign, and the chapel had more moss than bricks. They stared at him as he passed, not with hostility, with recognition, like the return of a shadow long forgotten. A woman, wrinkled and dry as bark, watched from her porch, her lips moving silently as he passed, her eyes locked on his jaw, as if she could hear it. House number 9 stood at the far end of the lane, past a crooked well and beneath 2 conjoined trees whose roots wove together like tangled fingers. It looked wrong, not ruined, not haunted, just paused, like it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for the door to open again. And when Luca turned the key, he swore he felt warmth from the handle. The air inside was still, not stale, still, as though it had not moved since the last heartbeat inside the house died. Dust hung like lace in shafts of dying sunlight. But everything was intact.
The chairs, the plates, a single candle still melted down to its final gasp on the kitchen table. And in the nursery, he didn't know why he walked there first. He didn't even know it was a nursery. But the door opened under his hand like it remembered him. Inside, a crib, empty. A mobile above it, unmoving, its strings stretched and stiff as dried veins. On the floor, a patch where the boards curved upward subtly, a memory of a smile. He backed out slowly. The nights were worse. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in grief, in trauma, in things passed down through silence and blood and the bend of DNA. But the house didn't care what he believed. It moved. Not loudly, just enough. A creak in the hallway when no one walked. A hiss near the fireplace that wasn't the wind. And worst of all, the dreams. Always of teeth. He dreamed of biting down on metal until his gums bled, of pulling thread from his mouth like floss made of sinew, of waking to find his jaw locked, his lips curled back and his tongue dry as ash. And in every dream he heard the same sound, grinding, like a mortar and pestle made of bone, and a whisper that echoed without a voice, "You have returned, but not forgiven and not fed." On the third day he found the box. It was hidden behind the false wall in the pantry. Stone, heavy, marked with carvings he couldn't read. Inside, teeth. Too many. All sizes. Some carved with names, some with symbols, and one with his. Luca, etched into the enamel of a premolar too small for an adult, too old for a child. He dropped it. It rolled across the floor and came to rest beneath the threshold. He didn't pick it up. Couldn't. His hands were shaking too hard. He left the house, but not the village. He sat at the tavern and drank until the walls bent. The barkeep, silent for hours, finally said, "You are her blood." Luca turned. Who? Annika, the last mourner. She died, right? Alone? The barkeep shook his head. Not alone, just unheard. A pause. We thought it ended with her. What ended? The barkeep looked at his mouth, at his teeth. The chewing. That night, Luca didn't sleep. He lay in the nursery, don't ask why, he didn't know either, and watched the mobile spin without breeze. It spun faster, then stopped. The crib creaked, and from under the floor came a sound he couldn't describe. Not a growl, not a whisper. Something wet, slow, and familiar. Then, tap, tap, tap. 3 times, from under the floor, followed by a 4th tap, inside his mouth. He sat up. His tongue touched a sharp edge near the back of his jaw. A new tooth, pushing through where no tooth should be. And it burned, with a name he hadn't yet remembered, but would, soon. Luca didn't sleep after that. He didn't try. There was something inside him now, not just fear, not just memory. It was physical, rooted, an itch behind his molars that pulsed with every heartbeat, like something was growing or gnawing. By dawn, the pain had dulled, but the pressure remained, a low, throbbing hum behind his jaw.
The house was silent. Too silent. Even the floor didn't creak anymore. He moved slowly, barefoot, as if afraid to wake the boards. Something had shifted in the night. He could feel it. The air was thicker, wetter, and colder, though no wind entered the sealed windows. When he reached the hallway, he noticed it. A bulge. Just beneath the faded wallpaper, near the seam where the nursery met the pantry. At first, he thought it was a warped plank, but it was soft. He pressed his palm to it. It gave, like flesh. He pulled back, heart pounding. Then, despite himself, he knocked 3 times. The wall knocked back. He didn't run. He wanted to, but something held him. Curiosity, hunger, or maybe just kinship. He fetched a knife from the drawer. Not to defend himself, he had no illusions of stabbing a ghost, but to cut. Carefully, he sliced the wallpaper. Behind it, wood, warped, rotten. And beneath the top plank, a seam, too clean to be accident, almost surgical. He pried at it. It came loose. Behind the board was a cavity, a narrow gap between walls, wide enough for an arm. And within that gap, a box, smaller than the one in the pantry, wrapped in cloth that was damp and stuck to the grain like scabbed skin. He pulled it free. The cloth tore. The box was warm. And inside, teeth. Not loose, not scattered. Set. Perfectly. Row upon row, top and bottom, like a disembodied jaw. But what made him drop it wasn't the shape. It was the names. Not carved. Grown. Each tooth had a name raised in the enamel itself, like bone that had remembered language. And one name stood at the very front. Luca. Again. But this time, not on a single tooth. On the whole jaw. He stared. Trembled. Then something moved behind him. He spun. Nothing. But the air had changed again. Thicker. The silence was no longer empty. It was listening. He didn't sleep that night either. Instead, he sat in the nursery with the jaw in his lap, staring at it until the candle bled into wax puddles. The mobile above him spun once, stopped. Then the wall behind the crib cracked. A sound like a sigh, and from that crack spilled dust. Not gray, white, powdered bone. Luca stood, stepping back, the jaw still in his hands. The crack widened, and beneath the wallpaper, another smile. Faint, hidden in the slats, but there. Every wall was grinning, and the jaw in his hands began to vibrate. He threw it in the fireplace, but it didn't burn. The flames hissed, sputtered, then turned blue. Cold radiated from the hearth like frost from an open grave. The teeth glowed, names pulsing like veins. One by one, the names rose into the air like ash and curled into words he couldn't read, but understood. Family, guilt, unburied, return. The next morning he found photos, hidden behind the false panel in the wardrobe, faded, warped, but recognizable. A woman, stern, eyes deep set, holding a child. Annika. And the child? Not Mila. Not Davor. Him. Luca. The same gap between his baby teeth, the same birthmark on his neck. He dropped the photo. On the back, in shaky handwriting,
He will carry it. He has no choice. His name was written before he was born. He screamed at the walls, at the air, at the name carved in his mouth, and for the first time the house answered with words, a whisper that bled from every floorboard, every crack, every thread in the wallpaper. You are not the end. You are the next. And in that moment, Luca understood. He hadn't inherited a house. He had inherited a mouth, a body of wood and grief, and it was hungry again.
Blood has weight, not just in volume, but in memory. That's what Luca felt as he sat by the fireplace, the unburned jaw still smoldering blue in the ashes. A heaviness in his chest, not emotional, not spiritual, physical, like something inside him had grown teeth. It started with the taste. At first, just metal, subtle, lingering on his tongue after sleep, like he'd been chewing coins in a dream. Then stronger, raw iron, wet steel, the unmistakable taste of blood. But there were no wounds in his mouth, no cracked gums. His lips were intact. Yet the flavor remained. And worse, it was familiar. He knew it. Not from injury, from childhood, from those long nights in the orphanage when he'd bite his blanket to keep from screaming, from the time he knocked out a loose tooth and kept it in his pocket for days, from the look on the nurse's face when he'd bled without reason and smiled anyway. It was his, but it wasn't just his. On the 5th day in the house, the fever came. It bloomed slowly, a rising warmth beneath his skin that didn't burn but boiled. He stood at the mirror and watched the color change beneath his eyes, gray turning crimson, as if his blood had begun to stir behind the veil of flesh. His veins pulsed, swollen, and just beneath his jawline he felt it. Movement, like something swimming upstream. He pressed his fingers to his neck. The lump was round, hard, tooth-like. Panic sent him into the attic. Dust, cobwebs, relics. He tore through crates, cracked trunks open with his bare hands, splinters biting his skin. He didn't care. And then he found it. A ledger, wrapped in rotting linen, bound with a ribbon made of human hair. Inside, names, a family tree, drawn not with ink, but with something darker. The Dragomir line. He traced it down. Ilya, Anika, Davor, Mila, and there, beneath a symbol shaped like a tooth, Luca. But the note beside his name chilled him more than anything. The last born, but not the last to feed. Taken to the city, return to be the gate. He slammed the book shut, but the words echoed inside him. Returned to be the gate. Gate to what? The past? The dead? The hunger? Or the house? That night, he sliced his palm with a shard of mirror. He had to see. The blood dripped onto the floorboards. They hissed, then drank. The droplets vanished instantly, leaving no stain. And beneath his feet, the familiar gnashing resumed. Only now, it matched his heartbeat. He ran, out the door, into the night. Fog swallowed him, not mist, not weather, fog with teeth.
Everywhere he turned, the path bent back to the house. He screamed. The village was gone, or hiding. And above him, the sky blinked with shapes that weren't stars. Wide, white grins etched into the clouds. When he returned, defeated, exhausted, the front door was already open, waiting. Inside, the air whispered. The blood remembers.
The bone obeys. Come to the hearth. He didn't want to, but his body moved. At the hearth, the blue flame was gone. The jaw in the ash had cooled, but now it had changed. Where there were once names, now there were portraits, tiny, carved into the enamel, and one of them was him, staring back, smiling, but the smile was wrong. It was wider, hungrier, feral. And beside it, another portrait. Not a man, not a woman, something in between. Elijah, the first name he'd seen carved into a tooth, and beneath that, Father of the Mouth. Luca fell to his knees, not from grief, but from understanding. He had been brought here not by fate, but by function. He was a return, a recycling of the curse, an heir to an open wound that had never scabbed. His blood was not his own. It was a recipe, an echo. He was the next in the line of guardians, not to protect the house, but to feed it, to become its tongue, its teeth, its memory. Then, from behind the wall, a sound. Scratching. No, not scratching. Carving. He pressed his ear to the nursery door. On the other side, something was etching. Into wood, into bone, into the air itself. He opened the door. Inside, the crib was gone. The floor was open, not broken, peeled back like lips, revealing gums beneath. And in the center, a tooth, large, wet, new, pulsing like a heart. And across its surface, a name was still being written, letter by letter, with invisible hands. L-U-K-A. He backed away, but the air thickened behind him, and the wall whispered, "The stranger is no stranger. The blood was never yours. You were only borrowed. Now you belong." He turned, but every window was smiling, and in the mirror, he didn't see himself. He saw Annika, but older, worn, and beside her, a child holding her hand, grinning with a mouthful of teeth that bore his name. And beneath them both, the house breathed, waiting. Luca no longer asked what was real. He understood now. The house didn't care. Reality, to this place, was a thing that bent when remembered too long, like a spoon kept in boiling water. It bent under the weight of grief, of names, of teeth. And the floor? It wasn't a floor anymore. It was a lid. That night, he didn't sleep. He waited, sat in the nursery where the air throbbed like lungs trying not to cough. The floorboards had curled again, slightly, into the memory of a smile. The tooth from the night before still lay in the center, glistening, fully formed now. His name was complete across its curved surface. Luca. He reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the root, the floor beneath him shifted.
Not collapsed, not broke. Opened. No sound, no splintering, just a soft unfolding, like skin stretching around an old scar. A perfect square of wood slid back, revealing not stone, not dirt, but steps, carved into the darkness, as if the house had always had a basement, but only now decided to show it. Luca didn't hesitate. He descended. Each step felt warmer, wetter, until the wood gave way to flesh-colored stone and the air began to pulse. The chamber was not large, but it was deep. It didn't echo. Sound in this place didn't bounce. It was absorbed. And in the center, illuminated by nothing, stood a table, stone, black, slick with something that glistened in no light. Around it, chairs, 6, and in each chair, a figure. He approached, knees trembling. They were not statues, not mummified corpses, not ghosts. They were preserved, not by science, by intention. Each one sat upright, eyes closed, mouths smiling, and across each face the same grotesque peace. The smiles weren't forced, they were chosen. And above every figure, etched into the wall, was a name. He read them. Ilya, Annika, Davor, Mila, Mircha, Radka. And in the center of the table, an empty spot. Its chair turned slightly, waiting. Above it, Luca. He staggered back. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, no!" But the air thickened. The chamber hummed. And from the walls, the teeth began to emerge. Dozens, hundreds. Not loose, not fallen. They pushed from the stone like roots from a bleeding tree, each bearing a name he didn't recognize but felt. Then a voice. "We are not gone. We are waiting. You are the tongue. You will speak for the blood." He shook his head, backed toward the stairs, but they were gone. The way he came had closed. Behind him, the tooth he'd carried began to glow, pulsing, warm, drawing him back toward the table. The chair scraped softly as it turned to face him. He was not just the last of the line, he was the next in line. He approached, not because he wanted to, because the floor beneath him rippled with command. He placed the tooth on the center of the table. The figures opened their eyes, all at once. They did not speak, they smiled wider. And Luca felt something rise in his throat, not a scream, not a sob, but a name. One he didn't know, one that tasted like old milk and copper. He spoke it aloud, and the room responded. Every tooth in the wall began to chatter, slow, steady, reverent, like applause made of bone. And the figures nodded, one by one. The chair didn't ask him to sit. It invited. And Luca, who had run from every home he'd ever been given, Luca, who had never known a family except the ones buried in silence, Luca sat. The stone was cold, then warm, then breathing. He gripped the edge of the table. The tooth in the center began to dissolve, melting into the stone, and as it vanished, he felt it grow behind his gums. A new molar, a new name, a new voice. And from within his chest, he whispered, "I'm home." It was tucked inside a wall, not hidden, embedded. The diary had no cover, just pages stitched with coarse thread and stained at the edges with something brown and dried. It pulsed faintly when Luca touched it, as if still remembering the hand that wrote it. The wall that gave it up had once been the nursery. He hadn't been looking for it. He just leaned, and the plaster breathed,
a soft sigh, like exhale after confession. And there, between two slats of rotting wood, a leather strap, a thread, a journal, and inside it, her, Annika. Day 1 after Mila's passing. I cannot cry. The house won't let me. It drinks every tear before it falls. I feel it now, the warmth under the floor. It wants my grief. It feeds on it. But I will not give it pain. I will give it love. Luca's breath caught in his throat. The ink was smudged. Some letters were scratched out, others replaced with symbols, teeth mostly, drawn in the margins like forgotten runes. Day 3. Davor says the elder is right, that I must follow the right, that it's better to pull one tooth than to lose everything. But how does pain honor the dead? What does it say to our daughter if I mutilate myself for her peace? I kissed her lips. They were cold, but her smile was real. She didn't ask for this. The next page was torn, then stitched back, with hair. Day 7. I felt her last night, not in dreams, in the bed. She laid beside me. Her breath smelled like milk and dirt. She whispered, "Why won't you bury me?" I said I had. She laughed. And then she said, "You forgot my tooth." The pages after that bled into one another. Ink spilled like veins across parchment. Some entries were just symbols, repeating like prayers chewed over and over, until the language returned. Day. The calendar is wrong. Time does not pass in here. It loops. I find plaid on the floor in the shape of my name, but it isn't mine. I've tried love. I've tried silence. Nothing stops the chewing. I thought memory was enough. I kissed her every night. I sang the songs of my mother and hers. I placed flowers under her pillow and prayed in 3 languages. But it wanted bone. This place does not honor mourning. It demands it. Not like a widow, like a god. Luca turned the page. This one was clean, almost too clean. Fresh, as if the ink had just dried. At the top, in large shaking letters, "If someone finds this, don't love the house. It will mimic your love. Wear it like a mask, and when you finally open your heart, it will sink its teeth in and smile forever." I tried. I tried to love it into peace. I gave it memories. I gave it lullabies. I gave it Davor. And when it wasn't enough, it asked for me. The final page was empty, until he turned it in the light. Then a word shimmered faintly beneath the grain, written in what could only be dried blood. Luca. He dropped the book. The pages curled in the candlelight, and behind him the wall sighed, a low, content exhale, as if something had waited years for him to read. And now it was closer. That night he heard her voice, Annika, but not from dreams, from the mirror. She stood behind him, pale, hollow-eyed, holding the book. "You're not here to end it," she said. "You're here to continue." "No," Luca whispered. "I'm not like you." "Exactly," she replied. "You still think you have a choice." She turned and smiled. Her mouth opened wider than it should.
Inside were no teeth, only names, and they were all his.
Luca stopped recognizing himself in mirrors. It didn't happen all at once. It began with the mouth. He first noticed it brushing his teeth, a habit he tried to keep to feel normal, though there was nothing normal about brushing teeth in a house that remembered every molar you'd ever had. He leaned forward, toothbrush mid-stroke, and blinked. His lips weren't quite aligned. The corners of his mouth stretched farther than they should. Not open, not torn, just ready. Ready to stretch wider, to smile deeper, as if the skin had grown tired of restraint. He pressed his fingers to his cheekbones. They felt soft, wrong, like the meat beneath had shifted, like it was retreating. By the third day, it wasn't just in the bathroom. Every reflective surface whispered the same betrayal. The kettle, the window glass, a spoon, all of them showed the grin. Not grotesque, not bloody, just wide and empty, like a smile without context, without cause, without flesh. He tried to film it, pulled out his phone, recorded himself speaking, hoping to catch it move on camera. But when he played it back, there was no voice, only a low grinding sound, like bone on stone. And his mouth, it didn't move. It just stayed open, wider, wider, until the corners of the screen distorted. He threw the phone into the fireplace. It didn't burn, just hummed, like the house had eaten its memory. Then came the bleeding, from nowhere. He'd wake to find red lines down his chin, trailing from the corners of his mouth like a child's attempt at makeup. But it wasn't from his gums. He checked. Nothing was loose, nothing was missing. No pain, just space. As if something was making room. He tore a sheet off the mirror one morning, desperate to see himself fully. No shadows, no distortion. And there he was, at first. Hair tangled, eyes tired, but whole. Then he blinked, and his skin lagged, just a fraction of a second too slow, like flesh trying to keep up with something faster beneath. His face didn't match his movements, and his smile, he wasn't smiling, but the reflection was, and it was wider now, curving past where his cheekbones should end, reaching toward his ears. And behind the lips, no teeth, just rows, endless rows of names, each incisor etched with script, each molar humming with breath, not his, theirs. He slammed his fist into the mirror. Glass cracked, blood spilled, and the smile in the reflection didn't flinch. It grinned wider. He ran to the elder. Tataluca's door was already open. The room smelled of mint, decay, and wax. The old man was waiting, as if he knew, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "You saw it, didn't you?" Luca nodded, breath shaking. "It's inside me." "No," the elder said softly. "It's always been you." "What is it?" "It's memory, unspoken, unburied, given shape. Your face is becoming the record." "Record of what?" The elder pointed at Luca's chest. "Of everything we tried to forget." He returned home that night in silence, not out of fear, out of resignation. The house opened for him, not the door, the walls. They sighed, split slightly, and breathed him in. The floorboards curled, and in the nursery mirror, his reflection no longer had skin, only a skull, not bone, tooth, a mask of enamel. And the grin?
infinite. Wider than the face, wider than the frame. A smile made to consume, to remember, to hold the names of the forgotten in its hollow spaces. He tried to scream, but his tongue dissolved, turned into breath, turned into dust, and as it faded, a final whisper crawled from his throat. I am not the last, only the next. The mouth never closes, and the blood always returns. And the house smiled with him. No lips, no flesh, just the sound of teeth, grinding forever.
Luca stopped calling them ancestors. The word didn't fit anymore. Ancestor implied the dead, but the Dragomir bloodline had never truly died. They were here, still here, not in portraits or prayers, not in graves or dust, but in teeth, in walls, in him. He traced it with shaking hands, from the journal, from the attic's bone-inked family tree, from the faces carved into molars hidden inside the walls. He was never the last of the line. He was the link, the bridge between what once fed the house and what now became it. He thought of his mother, the one in the orphanage files. Dead, they said, accident, unclaimed. But he remembered her breath, how it always tasted faintly of copper when she kissed his forehead. He remembered how she wept when he lost his first tooth, how she buried it in a shoebox beneath the floorboards. He thought she was sentimental. Now he knew better. She wasn't trying to honor him. She was trying to keep him safe. He returned to the nursery. The walls no longer shuddered when he entered. They welcomed, not like a host, like a parent. He sat beneath the curved planks, once a floor, now a jaw. Above him the mobile spun gently, without wind. From his pocket he pulled the carved molar with his name on it, the one that had appeared in the jawbone box. It pulsed now when he held it, and as he gripped it tighter, he felt a pull, not outward, downward, toward the blood, toward the lineage. The basement opened again that night. No sound, no protest. The stairs uncurled like a tongue, uncoiling in anticipation. He descended with bare feet. The stone was warm this time, wet with breath. The chamber below remained unchanged, 6 chairs, 6 smiles. But now the empty chair was no longer empty. It held a mirror, framed in bone, hung in air, floating without strings. And in that mirror, not Luca, not exactly. He saw 1,000 eyes behind his, 1,000 teeth in his grin. He saw Elia the first and Annika the mourner. He saw them all layered over him like sediment, each one a mouth that had opened once too many times, and now they lived in him, through him. He whispered, "What am I?" And the mirror answered, not in voice, in reflection. The glass rippled, and instead of a face, it showed a mouth, vast, endless. Inside it, hundreds of teeth, each marked with a birth year, some ancient, some not yet lived. Then the voice came, not from the mirror, but from his own jaw. It clicked between his molars like a second tongue. You are the archive, the mouth that remembers, the blood that speaks. He fell to his knees. I didn't choose this. You were never meant to. I don't want this. Then why are you still here? He screamed, fought, pounded the stone until his hands bled.
He threw the tooth across the chamber. It didn't hit the ground. It vanished, swallowed by the air. And the names behind his eyes woke. Anika, Davor, Ilya, even Mila. They didn't speak. They smiled. And through their grins came one truth. We never left. We were never buried. We just changed shape. And now, it's your turn. He rose, not because he wanted to, because his legs moved on their own. His jaw ached. He reached into his mouth and pulled. One tooth, then another. No pain, just pressure. And beneath each extracted tooth was another waiting, smaller, older, named. He understood now. His lineage didn't end with him. It began again through him. The house didn't devour the bloodline. It replanted it, each tooth like a seed, and Luca was the soil. Back upstairs, he found the family photos he'd once ignored. They had changed, not in color, in composition. Now each face smiled, every smile the same, that wide, too deep grin that wrapped around bone and memory. And in every smile, if you looked closely, you could see others, faces, generations, not behind, within. Luca touched the photo of Mila. She winked, and her teeth whispered, "You're part of it now." The whisper didn't come from the walls, or the floor, or the house. Not this time. It came from the tooth in Luca's hand, freshly pulled, still warm, the root still damp with the taste of metal and regret. He hadn't meant to extract it. It slid from his gums effortlessly, as if it no longer belonged, as if it had been waiting to leave. And now that it was free, it spoke. Not in words, not in sound. It hummed, vibrated, soft pulses that traveled through his fingers, up his forearm, into his shoulder, and finally settled behind his eye. And then, stories. Not visions, not hallucinations, narration. Whispers he couldn't silence, like a voice trapped inside bone. He was only 7 when he pulled his own incisor to bury it beside the calf that died choking on rope. He thought pain would bring peace. It didn't. She hid her grief behind hymns, but the tooth knew. It crumbled in her sleep. They fed the house lies for generations. We are not the curse. We are the truth that followed it home. Each sentence struck like a hammer to the temple. Luca staggered back. The tooth in his palm twitched. He tried to throw it. His hand wouldn't obey. Instead, it tightened around the bone, and the whispering grew louder. He dropped to the floor. The candlelight in the room dimmed, or the shadows grew stronger. He couldn't tell which. His mouth began to ache, not with pain, but with memory. His teeth itched, as if something underneath them, inside them, was waking. The tooth in his hand pulsed one final time, then whispered, "Bite down, and you will know." He didn't want to, but he was already doing it. He raised the tooth to his lips and pressed it between his molars and bit. The crack wasn't loud, it was hollow. The kind of sound you hear in a dream deep in your skull where no one else can follow. And when the tooth shattered, so did the silence. Suddenly, every tooth in his mouth began to buzz. 1,000 stories flooded in. Not images, words, from his bloodline, from the bones beneath the floor, from generations that had no voices in life, only grins in death, and now they used his tongue. One by one, the voices overlapped. Male, female, old, childlike. Some clear, others mangled by dialects long extinct. They spoke of wives buried without names, children hidden during plagues only to die alone, brothers who starved rather than pull a tooth for a sister, women who carved names into enamel to preserve memory when ink was forbidden, men who wore necklaces of their own teeth to defy the house and were devoured anyway. Each voice another crack in Luca's soul, and each one ended the same. I could not speak, so I smiled. We all smiled, and now so will you. He staggered to the mirror. His mouth was closed, but the reflection smiled. Not just one smile, many, dozens of faint, translucent mouths layered over his jaw. Some whispered, some trembled, some bit down on unseen pain. And behind them all, a voice that had not yet spoken. It waited, then whispered from the deepest molar, "Tell them, tell what we could not." The next day, Luca spoke for 12 hours straight. He didn't eat, didn't drink. He simply sat in the nursery, back against the wall, eyes glazed, and told stories of births, of betrayals, of mourning rituals that were never about peace, only containment. The villagers gathered outside his house, not out of fear, out of memory, because they knew those stories, pieces of them, told in broken lullabies, tucked inside superstitions, swallowed every time someone said, "We don't talk about that." And now the house was talking, through Luca, through bone, through teeth. When the last story ended, he vomited blood. In it, 3 teeth. One cracked, one gold, one carved with the word truth. He collapsed, and the house sighed, content, not fed, heard. Luca awoke with a spoon in his mouth. Porcelain, cracked. Its edge was stained red, not with blood, but with something thicker, memory. He sat upright, eyes bleary, tongue numb. He wasn't in the nursery anymore, not in the house, not anywhere that followed rules. He was at a banquet. The table stretched endlessly in both directions, wood warped like old bone, covered in lace made from thin strands of hair. The candlelight wasn't fire, it was breath, soft exhales glowing at each plate. And around him, the guests. They did not move, they did not blink, but they were alive. Annika sat 3 seats down, Davor next to her, Aliyah at the head, his smile wider than any face should allow. Their skin was stretched taut, translucent, as if it were trying to remember what it meant to be flesh. They all had spoons, and they all stared at Luca. A plate appeared before him. He hadn't seen it arrive. It was flat, wide, rimmed in delicate carvings of molars and incisors, each one smiling. And on the plate, a row of teeth. His. Familiar, intact, still warm. They were arranged like delicacies, some drizzled in black honey, others laid atop curls of parchment, written in a language he didn't recognize but understood. Each tooth had a name beneath it, not his, theirs. He reached for one. Mila, small, white, with a faint crack down the center. As he lifted it, the guest across from him nodded. A woman with no jaw, just a mouth etched into her neck. She opened it. A laugh spilled out, muffled, wet, like meat trying to speak. The tooth trembled in Luca's hand. He brought it to his lips. It dissolved on his tongue. And when he swallowed, he saw her, not a ghost, not a vision. He was her. For a second, less maybe, he felt the crib, the sickness, the warmth of Annika's hand, and the cold that came after. The ache of being forgotten, the endless scratching beneath the floor waiting for her tooth to be planted. Then it passed. His body seized, and another spoon appeared in his mouth, ready.
They fed him 12 more, one by one. Each time, another life, another memory, another grief, not his, now inside him. He swallowed. The molar of a midwife who buried her own jaw in secret to save her stillborn from the rite. A bicuspid from a man who sang to the bones beneath his house until they answered back. A canine from a girl who pulled her mother's teeth after death and wore them as beads, believing it would make her brave. Each bite added weight to his spine. Each chew echoed with voices he couldn't quiet. Until the final tooth. His own, unmarked, uncooked, still bloody. It lay on a napkin made of wedding veil. Ilya leaned forward. His voice was silk wrapped around stone. This one you must not swallow. Luca blinked. Why? Because you are the mouth now, and the mouth does not eat itself. He picked it up, felt it pulse. It was still connected. To him, to the house, to the line. And when he placed it on his tongue, it melted into words. You cannot escape blood, but you can choose how it speaks. Then the banquet vanished. The guests remained, standing now, surrounding him, not angry, not mourning, just expectant. They opened their mouths, rows of names stared back, and Luca smiled. For the first time, it was his. The house welcomed him back. No groaning floorboards, no whispering walls, just a long, deep inhale, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting. But Luca no longer approached it as a stranger, not as an heir, not even as blood. He entered as the ritual. In the center of the nursery, he laid out the tools, not relics, not icons, just these: a rusted spoon, a single taper candle made from hair and wax and old regret, a bowl carved from jawbone, his last tooth, the only one that hadn't been swallowed, the only one that hadn't been stolen by the house, the only one still his. He lit the candle. The flame flickered green. Not magic, recognition. Then he began. He didn't know the words. They came anyway. Not from his mouth, from the ache in his gums, from the pulse in his spine, from the pressure behind his eyes, like the voices of his bloodline pushing forward through enamel and memory. He knelt, opened the floor. The planks peeled back, not with violence, but like lips parting in anticipation. The soil beneath was soft, wet, fresh, hungry. He placed the bowl in the earth, then his tooth, then whispered, "Not for mourning, not for silence, not for fear. I bury this not to bind the dead, but to unchain the living." The earth trembled, not violently, like someone shifting beneath a blanket. The walls moaned, not in pain, but in memory.
and beneath his knees the soil drank the offering, slow, grateful. The bowl disappeared, then the tooth, then the ache. For the first time in weeks, his jaw was still. No gnashing, no grinding, just breath, his and not his. Then the floorboards curled inward, sealing the mouth of the earth. The nursery went quiet, truly quiet. Not the heavy, haunted silence of before. A clean silence, the kind after truth, the kind after screaming. He stood, looked at his reflection in the nursery mirror. No distortions, no extra mouths, no ancestral faces layered behind his. Just Luca, tired, worn, but intact. He opened his mouth, only one row of teeth, silent, whole, his own. He stepped outside. The air had changed. The fog that once clung to the village had retreated to the tree line, watching like an old dog finally dismissed from guard. A child passed on the road. She stared at him, then smiled. Not wide, not wrong, just human. And he smiled back. Later, he placed a sign on the front door, handwritten, simple. The mouth is closed now. Let memory rest with it. Knock only if you are ready to listen. Then he walked, away from the house, from the rite, from the endless chewing of the past. And as he passed beneath the old birch tree by the well, he heard a single sound from behind him. Not a creak, not a growl, just a burp. The house had fed long enough. Now, at last, it was full. The first tooth appeared at dawn. Luca found it lying neatly on the front step, set just beneath the line where wood met soil, where the living crossed and the dead once lingered. It wasn't his. It was small, smooth, childlike, still glistening with fresh blood, not dripping, placed like a note or an offering or a warning. He didn't touch it, not that morning. He stood in the doorway, arms slack at his sides, and simply stared. The soil around the tooth was undisturbed, no footprints, no markings, nothing but dew and silence. The house behind him made no sound, but he felt it, a faint warmth rising through the floorboards, like breath held back. He waited all day. Nothing came. No whispering from the walls, no sighing from the stairs, no strange hunger gnawing at his spine. It was almost worse than before. Emptiness was not peace, it was a pause. The next morning, a second tooth. This one larger, yellowed, cracked at the root, an adult molar, worn with age. It sat beside the first, perfectly aligned. Now it wasn't a warning. It was a pattern, a ritual reversing itself. He recognized the second tooth, not from memory, from a dream. That night he had dreamed of a man crying on his knees in a frozen field, pulling the tooth from his own mouth and whispering a name. Luca couldn't remember which, but the pain in the dream lingered like a bruise behind his ear. When he woke, the taste of iron was thick on his tongue. By the fifth day, the line on the doorstep had grown to 6 teeth, each from a different dream, each from a different voice. He began writing them down, not the teeth, the dreams, the moments before the tooth arrived, the emotion that came with it, the names he could almost but never fully grasp. There was a pattern. Each dream ended the same way, with a whisper, "I have no door, give me yours," and then, "Let me cross." He understood now. The house may have closed its mouth, but it still had a threshold, and thresholds are never just wood and hinges.
They are agreements. And Luca had agreed. When he performed the ritual, when he buried his tooth, when he said, "Not for mourning, for release," he had opened a new door, and the dead remembered. He asked the elder, Tata Luca, one final time. They sat beneath the twin birch trees, their roots tangled like bloodlines. Luca laid out all 12 teeth on a cloth between them. The elder did not speak for a long while. Finally, he said, "We thought we were feeding the house. We were only delaying the line." The line of what? Of memory, of pain, of every name we buried without letting it speak. And now? The old man looked at the cloth, at the teeth, at Luca. Now they want to come home. That night, Luca sat at the doorstep. He waited, not to stop them, to witness. At midnight, the wind rose, but it did not howl, it whispered. And with it came the dream. This time, not of one person, but of many, marching through snow and soil, mouths full of silence, eyes hollowed with forgotten stories, each one holding a tooth, each one placing it gently at a door that had once belonged to them. And when Luca opened his eyes, a 13th tooth waited before him, this one gold, etched with a symbol, not a name, a key. He knew then the ritual had not ended. It had only changed shape. And he was no longer the mouth. He was the door.
Peace was never part of the bargain. Luca realized that the moment he found the mirror cracked. Not shattered, cracked. Straight through the center of the reflection, like a spine splitting. And behind the break, he saw something move. Not behind him, not inside the glass, within him. A shape he did not own, a grin he had not formed, eyes that blinked slower than he did. He stepped back, but the reflection didn't follow. It stood still, smiling, waiting, then whispered, "We were never asking for rest. You assumed we wanted peace, but what we wanted was continuity." That night, Luca dreamed of bones knitting themselves back together, not into coffins, but into skins. He saw Ilya's fingers folding beneath his own. He felt Annika's breath rising in his lungs. He heard Mila's heartbeat echoing in his ear, steady, childlike, insistent. They weren't fading, they were moving in, becoming tenants in the marrow, each one laying claim not as ghosts, but as heirs. And Luca's body, his blood, his teeth, was the estate. He woke choking, not on air, on words. A phrase looping in his mouth, muttered through clenched teeth, unfamiliar yet fluent. He ran to the mirror. His tongue moved before he could stop it. "We are the breath behind your smile." He slammed his head into the glass. Once, twice, blood bloomed, but the voice kept speaking, now from his gums. "We gave you voice. We gave you space. Now you think you can take it back?" He lit every candle in the house, scattered salt at the threshold, hung teeth on twine over every window, scribbled sigils he half remembered from dreams. None of it helped. The house no longer mattered. The haunting had passed into him. The door was open, yes, but it wasn't just at the house's edge. It was behind his face. By the third day, The dreams became instructions, not from the house, from them. They taught him to write with blood that didn't clot, how to pronounce names never recorded, how to smile with his eyes closed and still be seen. And worst of all, they taught him to surrender, not by force, by invitation. Each day, a part of him stepped back, just slightly, gave room, let the others in, and in return, they offered him a gift: perfect memory. He remembered every burial he'd never seen, every tooth ever pulled in the Dragomir name. He remembered the first cry Eliha made as he pulled his wife's molar after childbirth. He remembered the soft sobs of a girl who placed her own baby tooth beneath a soldier's boot as an offering for his safe return. He remembered Devor's hand trembling as he held a spoon against Mila's tiny mouth, too late. And he remembered what came after. Not silence, but smiling. Always the smile. He understood then. The bloodline was never meant to end. It was designed to recur, not through descendants, but through hosts, through flesh that knew how to carry more than one soul. And now that Luca had opened the mouth, buried the tooth, completed the rite, he was the vessel, not the final mourner, the first congregation. He tried to leave, packed nothing, just walked. Into the fog, into the forest, into anywhere that didn't know the name Dragomir. But the trees watched him. Branches hung lower, roots tangled at his feet. And when he crossed the stream at the edge of the village, the water reflected not one face, but dozens, all grinning, all with his eyes, all whispering the same truth. Peace was never promised. You don't end us, you carry us. When he returned, he wasn't surprised to find a new tooth waiting on the doorstep, still warm, still bleeding. This one was his own, the one he'd buried, somehow returned, cradled like a newborn in a strip of cloth. He picked it up, held it to his ear, and for the first time, the tooth didn't whisper. It laughed. They saw it first in the roofline. The angle had shifted, tilted downward at the ends, a slight curvature, almost elegant, like the faint hint of a smile. Just a trick of perspective, the villagers told themselves. Houses settle, wood warps, time bends things. But by the next week, the windows blinked. They didn't shatter, didn't open. They simply shifted, like eyes behind lids adjusting to the light. And behind them, a glow. Not candlelight, not fire, warm breath. No one approached the house anymore. The sign Luca had placed on the front door, "The mouth is closed now," had faded, but something had replaced it. A grin, drawn in red, crude, wide, smeared with what might have been paint or blood or something older. And beneath it, a sentence etched into the wood: "We are ready to speak again." The villagers whispered about the returning teeth left on their thresholds, on windowsills, in bread baskets, each one marked with initials, each one still warm. They whispered about Luca's face when he walked through the square. He didn't wear it anymore. He carried it, a stretched expression of politeness. No malice, no sadness, just presentation, like a butler opening a door that no one wanted to enter. And beneath that smile, nothing, only teeth. Too many, all belonging to someone else. One evening, a fog came back, thicker than ever. But this time, it didn't wrap the village.
It grew from the house, poured from the windows like breath in winter, billowed from the chimney in long, low moans. And when it touched the stone paths, it curled into words, names, all Dragomir, all traced in vapor, fading with each step forward, except one, Luca. That one burned cold on the village square until sunrise. By then, no one doubted it. The house had changed. Its siding bulged in places. The shutters drooped at the corners. The floor within, according to the one foolish soul who peeked inside, undulated like a tongue rolling beneath wooden gums. They say the walls were now lined with framed photos, not of people, but of smiles. Dozens, hundreds, some wide, some broken, some still streaked with blood, each one captioned with a name, each name followed by a date that hadn't happened yet. And Luca?
He no longer left the house, not through doors at least. He appeared in windows, stared down from the attic, reflected in puddles that never dried, always smiling, never speaking. But the villagers heard him, in the creak of their floorboards, in the clink of spoons against bowls, in the soft knock behind walls where no one stood. And when they dared to speak his name aloud, the wind hissed back, "He is not Luca. He is the grin. He is what remembers us when we forget ourselves." The final proof came on the first frost. A boy, no older than 8, went missing. They found his shoe at the edge of the Dragomir porch. Beside it, a tooth. Not his, but when his mother picked it up, it whispered her son's name and then smiled. She swore it, said the enamel split open like lips, and spoke in Luca's voice. "The house does not eat, it welcomes, and now it remembers him too." That night, the villagers gathered torches, axes, salt, oil. They stood at the edge of the square, facing the house, but it was already awake. The porch boards curled like lips peeling back. The roofline bent wider. The shutters blinked. The chimney exhaled laughter. And in the doorway stood Luca, or what was left of him. He did not move, he did not speak, but his smile stretched from cheek to ear. Behind it, rows upon rows of teeth, some old, some new, some familiar. And carved into his gums, glowing beneath the skin, "We are not the past, we are what happens when you bury it wrong." The villagers did not burn the house. They couldn't. The flames curled away, shivering. The torches went out before crossing the yard, and the oil froze in its jug. Because this was no longer a house. It was a mouth. And mouths, once open wide enough, become something more. Something that doesn't eat you. It keeps you. The house had been empty for 17 years. At least that's what the documents said. No recorded tenants, no utilities, just a deed passed quietly through legal offices, sealed in yellowed envelopes with wax too brittle to melt. It was cheap, too cheap. But Lily and Mark didn't ask questions. Young, in love, craving a quiet place to begin again. They'd left the city behind, its noise, its neon, its pressure to succeed, and drove east, deep into the Carpathians, where fog hung like cobwebs on pine, and everything felt like an exhale. Drakova was quaint, empty, perfect.
and the house at the end of the road, #9, waited for them, grinning. "It has charm," Lily said, squinting up at the slanted roofline. Mark frowned. "Why does it look like that?" "Like what?" He tilted his head. "Like it's smiling." Lily laughed. "It's probably warped. Old beams. You always think things are haunted." He didn't respond. But as she walked up to the porch, he swore the front door breathed in. Inside was dust, stillness, and something else. Warmth. Not comforting, not oppressive, just present. Like someone had been standing in the room moments before, or never left. The floor creaked beneath their feet, but not from rot, from recognition. They unpacked slowly, swept out the cobwebs, opened the windows, lit candles to mask the scent of mildew and something sweet and metallic beneath it. By dusk, Lily stood in the doorway of a small room at the back of the house, the nursery. Cribless now, bare, but the floor curved, just slightly, enough to make her shiver. She stepped back, closed the door. "I'll turn it into a reading room," she whispered to herself. The house heard. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He dreamed of a box, heavy, stone, carved with tiny letters like veins. When he opened it, teeth spilled out. Each one called his name, but not Mark. Not exactly. Variations. Marcin, Marek, Mihai, Mircea. Each a whisper of something older than him. Each familiar like a forgotten bruise. He woke to a knock. Not at the door, on the floor. Lily was already up, in the hallway, holding something in her palm. "Did you leave this for me?" she asked, smiling nervously. In her hand, a tooth, small, yellowed, etched with the letter L. He stepped forward, looked closer. No, not just L. L-I-L-Y. They tried to laugh it off, joke about old pranks, a former tenant with a sense of humor. They threw the tooth in the bin, burned sage, drank wine. But at midnight, a second tooth appeared, this one on Mark's pillow, wide, flat. His. He hadn't lost any, but when he checked, his back molar was gone. In the attic, they found the photos, dozens, all the same man, smiling, always smiling. The smile changed, grew wider over time. The jaw elongated, the eyes dimmed, but the name on the back was always the same, Luca. They tried to leave, packed their car before sunrise, but the engine wouldn't start. The road vanished in fog, and the front door of the house swung open again, inviting. They stood in silence, and on the porch, between two candles they hadn't lit, lay a white envelope. Inside, a single sentence, scrawled in blood-red ink. "The harvest begins when the next mouth opens. Thank you for coming home." They never screamed. No one heard them if they did, because Drakova remained silent. The villagers had long since learned, let the house choose, let it feed. And when the wind shifts just right, when it blows from the east, sometimes you can hear it, The sound of teeth, chewing, smiling, remembering.